Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On today's episode, Ilia Topuria, he wants some of that BMF action. Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, in boxing, was their promotional tour a success? And PFL 1, 2, and 3 regular season weeks, they are in the books. Who's impressed you the most so far? All right, hello everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. We got Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's in Las Vegas. Danny Segura, the host of Hablemos MMA. He's in Miami. Dan Tom, the host of Protect Yannick. He's also in Las Vegas. Cold Coffee, he's also in Las Vegas. A lot of people don't even know that because he travels the world. He's going to be on today's ones and twos, as always. But before we get started, if you would kindly hit that like button, like right now, I'd greatly appreciate it. Come on, Junkie Nation. Let's all take a page from the Nike playbook and just do it. And I realize it's dripping with irony as I'm wearing Adidas while I say that, but never mind that. All right, guys. So panel, listen up, man. Since the minute Justin Gaethje's head bounced off that octagon floor over there at UFC 300, I haven't even seen or heard not one MMA fan that's not pushing for Topuria versus Holloway. Am I off here? I mean, have you guys felt the same around you guys? Volkanovski, the rematch. This all reminds me of the time that Cousin Harold in the movie Menace to Society was left on the floors of the streets of LA, and his crew said, nah, we're gonna have to do that shit another time. I mean, everyone's dismissing that fight, and they're all about this one. Are you guys surprised at the way this thing has kind of taken off there? This has a lot of heat. Goes, what's your thoughts here?
Well, the heat is like a little different for me because I wasn't expecting that. Max Holloway has never really needed to prove anything to anyone. He's been a badass for so long. So it's fun to actually have somebody on the other side of him that's actually trying to poke him a little bit. And it's actually working. I kind of like it. Look, if you look at all of his foes in the past, right, like Volkanovski, he's always given him his respect. All these guys Max Holloway's done so much that there's really not much you could say negative about the guy. So to have somebody there kind of saying, look, I think I can do this, I can do that, you have to play this game to come towards me, that's just different. It's a little refreshing, Topuria, that guy's just a different beast, man. I really want to see this fight. I don't want to see 155 yet. To me, this makes a lot of sense. He's different, he's cut from a different cloth, and he has different types of attacks that I think can make this fight really, really interesting. And Max Holloway has shown that, yes, he can point to the center of the cage and get somebody to throw down, but he can also stick to a game plan too, So I really, really like this fight. The more and more I think about it and play the scenarios out in my head, the more excited I get, man. But I can't wait, dude. That speed that Topuria brings to the game, the ability to maybe take this to the floor, and then Max Holloway just seems like he's got this new fresh breath of life in him, right? He was a guy that was in no man's land not too long ago, and here he is at the top again. People talking about him, people saying they don't even want to fight him, they don't even want to be in the same elevator as this guy. This is an amazing fight. It has to happen.
Dan Tom, bro, as a fellow Hawaiian and someone who actually picked Holloway, not many people did, but I caught Protect Your Neck the day before, and I heard those predictions. I heard around 5 in there, so I know you're going to be spending some of that loot maybe. But anyway, what are your thoughts, man? Are you surprised the way this thing has taken off, man? A lot of good heat, healthy heat, like competitive heat, like, no one's trashing each other's mother or anything, but I think we're all in, right? Are you?
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty straightforward, and I feel like it tests the UFC's kind of old model, which is crazy to say that, especially after something like UFC 300 just delivered, right? I don't want to end up on a Dana White highlight reel or anything, but it's kind of crazy to say that the old way is essentially Dana White giving the fans what they want to see. Remember that, guys? Remember the old Dana White vlogs, from whether it was ticket giveaways and to the matchmaking itself within the promotion. And this is one of those things where the MMA gravity, not even just the fandom, just the whole MMA, sphere, the whole MMA space, if you will, kind of zeroed in. Like George so beautifully set this up, right? As soon as Gaethje's head hit the canvas, hope he's doing well. But yeah, as soon as that happened, the whole world was focused on Topuria's reaction, what was coming out of Topuria's mouth. And, I don't have to preach to the choir, especially as far as, who I've got here, Danny, George, and Goes, as far as, the soccer or football, España presence, and to see how Topuria is already exploding on that radar. Now he's going to ingratiate himself to Western fans with some trash talk to help build this up. Yeah, I think to what you guys are saying, the only question is it for a BMF to not disrupt the title with, Volkanovski and perhaps others in the wing at 145, or is this the perfect setup for Max to go down? I think for Max going down, it's better for his legacy, but for Max going back down, perhaps that could also be better for Topuria. So there's some interesting trade-offs here.
Yeah, the BMF part of it really makes things interesting. We'll definitely get to that in just a second. But Danny, I want to get your reaction. You've been all about this as well, covering the sport for a long time. I like what Dan says. It kind of does take us back to what the fans want and not necessarily what the business needs. But how are you feeling about all the way this thing's kind of been cooked up?
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked by the way things have played out, because UFC 300 was massive. I didn't know that Max Holloway was going to steal the show. Unlike Dan, I had him. I thought he was going to get badly hurt against Justin Gaethje, and all of a sudden, after UFC 300, such a massive event, then we go through a week without a UFC event, and then now a smaller one this upcoming Saturday. Some of the biggest talk around this is around MMA in general is just Max Holloway versus Ilia Topuria. I thought there would be a possibility that Holloway could kind of insert himself there with a win, but saw it unlikely, but didn't think it was going to take the life that it's taken. I always thought, hey, the front runner for that is always going to be Volkanovski, such a dominant champion. The biggest fight for Ilia Topuria still, in my opinion. Or at least that's what I thought back then. He's done enough. He deserves the immediate rematch. And all of a sudden, I'm not even thinking about Volkanovski anymore, and I'm only thinking about these two fighting. So I'm surprised with the way it has played out, and I'm surprised with the type of interest that it's gathered in the last few weeks. This could really become a big grudge match, and who knows, maybe even a big rivalry, depending on how the results play out. So we'll see, but definitely intrigued with what's brewing here.
That's how huge of a moment it was for Max to point to the center of the octagon and get down the way he did with a comfortable lead, by the way. He was already on his way to victory, but that he put himself out there, and this moment has been so huge that here we are 10 days later, 9 days later, still talking about it. But Max has options, right? Is this the fight to make slam dunk? Like, let's move on? Or there's something about this whole champ thing, legacy stuff, right? He's been the champ at featherweight, and he's defended it at featherweight multiple times. So could he just wait for the winner of Poirier and Islam and just chill, right, and fight there? Or do you pointing towards Topuria no matter what?
Well, I don't even think that option is just like right there on the table waiting for him. So many things happen in the UFC. To me, look, it makes the most sense. Do this at 145, man. Go down there, take this fight. If you win, great. There's a new story for you to build off of. If you lose, hey, look, it's a wrap on 145, and you can rebuild your career at 155. You took out one of the best 155ers in the world, so we all know that you're capable of doing great things at 155, and you just kind of build towards that, I think, if you were to lose that fight. But when we're talking about, GOATs of different divisions and legacy and all that, this might be a moment where Max Holloway can kind of gain a little bit of ground that he may have lost to Volkanovski, right? If you can beat the guy that just beat the guy that beat you, then you start having these little round robin type discussions that we get sometimes with fighters, where certain fighters have beat others. And I think maybe that kind of brings a little bit of new life to Max Holloway's legacy. Again, he wins the belt. You can build off of that. I think it's worth going down there and trying that. And if you lose, you can always rebuild your career at 155. So for me, I think 145 makes the most sense right now.
I think I would agree with that, And guys, look, like I mentioned, heat, right? Competitive, healthy heat is what's kind of been out there. I'm not talking about the NBA team that got squashed by 20 points yesterday at the Boston Garden. I'm talking about the tension between Topuria and Holloway. Well, here's a piece of that, all right, via social media. And this comes from Ilia Topuria, the featherweight champion in the UFC. Check it out, guys. He says, the only thing questionable about me is whether I finish you by KO or submission. I like it. I just beat the guy that beat you not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now you have one thing that keeps you relevant, and that would grant you a money fight. The BMF belt like Dan Tom mentioned earlier. I no longer fight for money, but for legacy. Winning that belt while holding my title will cement me as the first to hold both belts, the first to knock out Volk, and what most recently will happen when we fight. What will most certainly happen when we fight. The first one to put you to sleep, he also adds. Something to calm you down is this: God doesn't shame anyone. You will have a worthy defeat against the champion who will be remembered for eternity. I decide who, when, and where. And get this, guys, he says, he finishes strong. I like this tweet. If you don't like the terms, I'm sure Ortega will oblige. And of course, we all know Ortega took out Yair Rodriguez in Mexico recently. So is this BMF request fair? Danny, let's go to you. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'm not a fan of the BMF belt. You know, I've trashed it multiple times here. I thought it was an exclusive thing for Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal. It seemed fitting. But now, I mean, we're seeing not only that it came back, but it's being defended. And these are the type of problems that the BMF belt brings. Like, yes, sure, it's exciting to have another new belt. Like, it certainly added another wrinkle to UFC 300. But what is the meaning of all this, right? Like, can it, if Max Holloway fights Ilia Topuria next, which is very likely, is that in play? Or like, what are the requirements? Because look, Ilia Topuria is a bad motherfucker. I'll say that. And I would say that most people in the UFC are as well. So it's like the qualifications to compete for it. You know, most people meet them in the UFC. Most people are badasses. So, yeah, I don't know. I think from Topuria's standpoint, it makes all the sense in the world. Like, the BMF belt clearly has picked up a lot of interest. So if he can be both undisputed UFC champion and the BMF of the promotion, that is huge. Also, first person who ever knock out Max Holloway, I mean, that'd be huge for him as well, if obviously he gets that done. So I think his request is fair. He is the champion. He can call his shots a little bit. But I just don't like the existence of this BMF belt. But yes, it's fair. It's completely fair. And I actually love it. I actually love that Topuria is got this little fire underneath him and is angling for big things and for legacy. Sure, the money's nice to him, but he wants to be the greatest of all time at 145. And look, at just 26 years of old, 26 years of age, you can't really discard that idea that he may go on a run and do something great. So I like it. I like the attitude. I don't like the BMF belt's existence.
Dan, you want to weigh in?
I want to weigh in definitely, because I just got Dana White's new highlight idea sent to me. Danny Segura never believed in the BMF belt. That's how it's going to start. MMA is going to be a black and white shot of Danny on this show. But at the risk of being put on that very same highlight video, I actually echoed Danny's sentiments, and we'll just add in, for the sake of the BMF conversation whilst we're on it. I heard a lot of people that were in favor of it, or just talking about it in general, justifying it as a way for non-champions to get belts. So opening the door to this Topuria matchup, as much as it makes sense, you know, does that, you know, kind of take away from anything, you know, anything, if you were putting anything, assuming, into the BMF belt? And you got to assume that as much as that could get absorbed into a championship, maybe the UFC would prefer that if they're attaching points to this belt. You know, maybe get this belt in the hands of a champion. That's one less points we got to pay out. We can get two birds with one stone if Topuria owns that belt. That's one less points payout for us. You know, they're always thinking about that budget. So yeah, interesting stuff.
It's so confusing, you guys. Like, honestly, I get why people like it, and it's kind of cool to see some of these people, like see Mark Coleman come out and put the belt, The Rock, all that stuff, all the eyes that come on it. And I think it does bridge a little bit of maybe that pro wrestling gap where you know, they have similar belts like that. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not even sure the UFC knows what they're doing with this thing, and that's what makes it so confusing. It's like, okay,
it's handy for them.
Yeah, it is. But look, if it goes into the hand of a champion, like, I just think at that point, you just get rid of it and it goes back into circulation, and you pick two more people to fight for that belt. Because the thing is, like Danny said, I think on the last episode, you can't just have anybody hold that belt. There's a certain swag that you have to carry to kind of even be considered in that type of the fight. Because at the end of the day, every division has a top dog. We already know who the top dog is. So why should that person be the BMF as well? Like, they already kind of are the BMF of that division. They have the belt. That's what that means, right? So for them to have two belts that kind of mean the same thing, I really don't get that. I'd say if a champion ever fights for it, they get the belt, that's fine. But then it just kind of goes back into circulation. Pick two more people that are deserving. Because what is this belt going to live in featherweight for the rest of its life? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Pick two people who have swag. do it again, run it again. But I don't hate Topuria for requesting that. That makes a lot of sense. I would do that. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have a guy with 2 belts. What happens the next time he fights? Which one's on the line? Can you actually lose one and keep the other?
Yeah.
It's so confusing. Like, none of that makes sense.
George, I'm going to take your spot here as host for a second, and I want to
Go for it.
ask you guys this: what odds would you give that a UFC champion, undisputed champion, at one point in time will also hold a BMF belt? Because so far, the significance of it is right. We got these championship fights, and then we got these sort of bad motherfuckers fighting, right? Like it's been kind of separate. But why can't it merge, right? Like if Holloway and Topuria fight, you guys see a world where an undisputed champion also holds the BMF belt?
I do, because I won't put anything past this company. And right now, it looks like Topuria is going about it the right way. He's kind of poking the guy, right? Holloway tried to tell him, man, that's not BMF-esque what you're doing, especially, you know, coming off the heels of what some are calling the greatest knockout ever, or the most spectacular knockout ever. Who knows? So, but I don't put it past the UFC, but I kind of like Goz's idea of, if you got it, cool. But now we're going to go maybe towards the middleweight division or the welterweight division, or maybe even the heavyweight division. How are they not the baddest motherfuckers if you think about it? But and just give it some new life. You know, I've never minded it. I didn't want them to force it on us, but I felt like the 3 matchups had that element. And I think you have to earn it over time, being a badass with the fights that you've had. So far I've been okay with it. I don't know. I don't know what the other guys think. What do you guys think?
I agree. I mean, I could see it happening totally. But at the same time, if we were sticking by this, then like, yeah, this belt should be open for like, you know, the Masvidals of the world. I'll even throw guys like the Jim Millers of the world, like a way to pay off those kind of gritty war veterans who are never really going to get there, but you know, they're in action fights. Like, you know, I can kind of get behind it there. I'm not a big fan of the BMF belt. Again, kind of more like Danny. But at the same time, like if we're going to stick to that premise and it's a chance for like other people to get some extra money, you know, whether it's point earnings, a belt, accolades, all these things that we're always like, oh, if only this guy could get a title shot, or if only they gave bonuses to the lower guys in the cards, not just the champs who are already getting paid. We always have that complaint, right? Like if we use it as a tool to give to that, you know, deserved middle tier, working class tier, then by all means keep it around.
Yeah, I thought it would have been perfect for Lawler, but Lawler got to an undisputed title. But I always thought Robbie Lawler was a BMF. Diego gave us some great fights over the year. Matt Brown gave us some great gritty fights over the year. You know, these really do look, they have that look, and they fight in a way where you're like, oh, I'm going down another alley. I just saw Matt Brown. He looks pissed. So we'll see. Keep it in circulation. Just don't force feed it on us, which I think, by the way, not that we're going to, well, never mind. Yeah, I don't even want to get into the whole Dana White video thing, but I do want to ask something. Yeah, go ahead.
Doesn't the BMF, like to you guys, I don't know if it means the same thing to you guys, but to me, what it means is you can take the champion from any division, right? That means they're the best at that weight class. But if I'm walking into the bar and I'm going to get in a bar fight, I don't always want that guy with me, right? I don't want John Jones with me in a bar fight. I'll take Derek Lewis, though. You know what I mean? I don't want Leon Edwards with me, but I'll take Jorge Masvidal in a street fight. That's what the BMF means to me. Just somebody a little bit out of that fold. Some that's a little crazy. He's got a little swag to him. To me, like, I don't know, some of these guys, if they were to hold that belt, it would lose the significance of it for me.
Yeah,
I agree. Dan, let me ask you this question.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm coming to you here anyway, but whatever you want to add to it. Do you think Topuria was even out of line? I mean, this is a legend we're talking about, right? In Holloway, who's kind of conducted himself with a lot of class. We just saw in that B-roll how he's raising Arnold Allen's hand when he defeated him. He had so much grace and respect for the Korean zombie. He's taken his 3 L's against Volk, you know, like a champ, as terrible as that sounds, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Even Aldo, he still praises Aldo. So what do you think, you know, about Topuria's kind of the angle that he's taken in all this?
I mean, you guys know me. I'm not the biggest fan of it. And when I kind of said earlier, like ingratiate himself to more Western fans, because that's just kind of what our culture seems to be about, you know, not to sound like a gray hair boomer, as I'm getting grays coming in, but you know, the whole TikTok and the whole online generation of just, you know, even just, you know, Twitter, kind of changing and you know, it's all about dunking on somebody and, you know, I'm the best, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the influencer status. So it's really all in line. It's only going to help him. So I can't talk crap about his crap talk because that is a way to gain traction. However, even if you don't have my sensibilities, which I don't blame you, I'm not telling you to have my sensibilities, by the way, I do feel like it stands out kind of oddly because, like you mentioned, George, this is, my always go-to was Glover Teixeira when you talk about like the best sportsman in the octagon or in MMA, like Glover Teixeira. He was waking his opponents up, making sure they're okay. I'll forgive a bad loser way faster than I'll ever forgive a bad winner. I hate bad winners. And Max Holloway is not a bad winner. He is all class, and he is giving Glover Teixeira a run for his money when you consider just like the most sportiest, classiest dudes. Like George was saying, you can't really think of a time where Max, whether he's winning like Arnold Allen or even losing like Volkanovski, putting like a real genuine like, hey fans, give credit to Volk. He's the new champ, yada yada. So it really kind of rings not false because it's not false, but it does ring kind of sour what Topuria perhaps is doing than normally it would. I think this is the normal approach, but against a guy like Max, it's kind of like, all right. I mean, I don't know what you're barking at there, but okay.
I love Dan Tom, but I couldn't disagree anymore. I think this is perfect. Look, I thought I knew Max Holloway going into UFC 300, right? For the longest time, he's the second best featherweight behind Volkanovski, fan-friendly style, this and that. But after UFC 300, he completely redefined my sort of definition of him. And all of a sudden, now I'm wondering, like, okay, what can he really do? I thought he was just going to be in no man's land and this was going to be the rest of his career. Hell no. He's got another win in this. He can achieve great stuff. And I loved seeing that new aspect of Holloway. And now I'm loving even more seeing this sort of salty, sour, pissed Max Holloway coming after Ilia Topuria. And look, I love a good trash talk so long religion, race, and all these and family doesn't get involved. And I think that's a sweet spot where this trash talk so far has landed on. It's all about legacy. It's all about who's the best. It's all about who's the baddest. And I couldn't be any more excited. I was excited already for the style clash because it's a fantastic fight. But if you add that little bit of edge, I'm all in. And I'm loving seeing this side of Max Holloway because he's a nice guy. But and I kind of teased him a little bit like he shouldn't be fighting for the BMF, but he was just at the Boys and Girls Club. But that made all change once he gets going. He's got that Hawaiian blood. Dan Tom knows about that. So I'm sure, when push comes to shove, maybe we'll see a different side of him that will keep furthering this sort of new discovery of Max Holloway, this new chapter. So I'm all in. I'm super excited for this.
All right, Dan, let's make this quick. I know you got hours of footage to pour through before this fight's even made, and if it is, the matchup. But just when you hear the two names, I know you got an encyclopedia of who's a southpaw, who does this, who's got cardio. But what right away, just do you have an early lean on that fight? And I know even though you are Hawaiian and you did peck Holloway in the last one, you're always unbiased. So what are you leaning towards early here?
Yeah, I did pick Volkanovski in fights 2 and 3. That's the only times I think I picked against Max, but there's a bias that I have to fight there, admittedly. And even though I do reserve my picks for fight day, I'll say this. I don't know if you have odds. I know you're an odds guy, George. I'm sure they already have odds up on the match, even if they're fantasy odds, right? But I would imagine that either it's going to be tight odds no matter what. It shouldn't be wide odds. But I imagine that if Topuria is not opened as the favored, that public money will push him to a slight favorite, and that's where it will close. Will that be where my pick goes? I'm not necessarily sure. Against the Max that we've seen, his durability. For me, my early lean is actually toward Max, but like I kind of hinted toward earlier, I think he looked so much better in so many ways, like Danny said at 155. But as far as the tactics, what was there, his foundation, his build, his performance goes, I think he could be a better performer at 55. And even though he has got a lot of miles, he is 32. And when you get to that 31, 32 age, that's when I don't like seeing guys killing themselves for those lighter weight classes like 45, 35, or 25. So there's a little bit of worry if he goes back down to 45 in my mind, but my lean is Max.
Okay. Now, I did look at it really quick as you were talking, and I found some odds here, courtesy of Forbes.com. I thought they were all about billionaire lists, but looks like they've expanded. Minus 175 for Topuria, and the comeback appears to be plus 150 on Max Holloway. So, yeah, is that kind of feel right to you guys or whatever?
I don't think it should get wider than that for me, but I'll let the guys weigh in.
All right. Well,
That's about right.
look, we'll have time to talk about it and dip into it when the fight is actually made, I guess. But it really sounds like all three of us are warm to it. Fans are warm to it. And I think that's the way it should go. Now, listen, folks, you in the chat room that accompanies the show, if you want to weigh in somehow, give a thought, a question, a comment, you can. And I will try and blast through a few of them when I see some. I'll do this one quick. It's total off topic, but it was big. Josh Wallace says, how lucky do y'all feel not to be targeted in Dana White's shit talking video? I don't care if he did or didn't. I can't speak for the guys, but us at Junkie, we don't sweat it. We're professionals here. So actually, I laughed along with it just to give you an answer on that end. Quay Stefan says he bet 20 on Max to win by points. He heard that all the fighters were taking Max and went with their knowledge. But Dan Tom hit round 5. That's why. Cha-ching. But still, if you took Max to win, that's awesome. Karate Ted Toon says Topuria says he wants the BMF belt big time. Yep, exactly. Vince G, Max versus Ilia is the fight to make. All right, we're going to stray away from MMA. We're going to talk about some MMA fighters that are going to get down in the squared circle. So for the past week or so, the original BMFs, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, they've flown all around the country promoting their upcoming boxing match in early June. MMA Junkie was present at multiple press conferences, and we'll get to more on that in just a second. But look, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, that fight in MMA was pretty good. I really, really enjoyed it. Their next fight will take place in the squared circle, a whole different other sport. There is no UFC here to promote. There is no Dana White to let you know what's up. They have to do the heavy lifting. What are your guys' thoughts on the media tour? Was it successful? What's your level of interest, Goes?
Level of interest has gone up a little bit. With these media tours, what tends to happen in boxing is you want your first one to be big and your last one to be big. The ones in the middle don't usually count for very much. With two guys here, it's a little strange because, you know, these are two crazy guys, man. Like, you don't want it to go too far because they'll go to the point where you can't have the fight. You know, you're dealing with two very, very strong personalities, but they have to keep it fresh. They're fighting for everyone's attention, right? And there's so many options of what to watch on your television, especially now if you're into other sports with hockey and basketball playoffs heating up. To me, I think at times it popped and at times it fell a little flat. When it fell a little flat, I have to put some of the blame, maybe a little bit more of it, more on Nate Diaz, because at the end of the day, Jorge Masvidal has already kind of proven that he's the better fighter. We saw them fight already. He won and he beat him soundly. In my opinion, it's up to Nate Diaz to sell us on this fight. He's the one that has to come out of his shell, and he's the one that has to tell us why this fight is going to be different, why we need to pay all that money to watch this fight again. What is going to be different? What are you going to do in this fight that's going to be different from the first time? We need a reason to tune in, and I think that falls more on his side than it does Jorge Masvidal, because Jorge Masvidal has already proven he's able to beat him. So I think Nate needed to liven up a little bit, you know, and maybe get in his face. I get that things can get a little heated if you put them too close, but I mean, they were like a couple yards apart when they were doing the stare downs at times. So it was like a roller coaster, George, to answer your question.
Yeah, those face-offs were kind of duds, to tell you the truth. Look at Forrest Daniels in the chat room. He says, can't wait to see Masvidal versus Diaz in boxing. Said no one ever. And then he also says, even Nate Diaz doesn't care about this fight. And you're right. He gives off that vibe. He kind of did it in the Jake Paul fight. He didn't realize, holy crap, I'm kind of the promoter and the boxer. So I think he almost shortchanges himself. But listen, like I mentioned before, MMA Junkie was present multiple times during this press conference, boxing press conference tour in Las Vegas at stop number 1. Mike Bond caught up with the 209's very own Nate Diaz. They also talked some MMA. Here's that clip.
Is there any type of pipe dream that we could ever get to?
I have 100% guarantee I'm going to fight Conor McGregor again. And I have 100% guarantee I'm going to probably fight Jake Paul again, this fucking fucker again, and Leon Edwards again. That's my hit list.
Would you like to fight Conor in this fit?
Yeah, 206, right? Yeah, that's my plan. It's something like that.
I imagine you meant 306, which is at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Danny Segura, what are your thoughts, man? Well, actually, let me go to Dan on this one. Dan, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is likely to happen? We'll focus on Nate versus Conor. I know you mentioned the hit list, but what do you think of that fight?
I mean, it depends. You got to see on results. And as much as I'm a big, Diaz brother and 209 fan, I love that whole crew and all whatnot. But Nate, toward the end of his career, let's not forget, he's kind of gotten a little Tito Ortiz like, in the sense of, everyone give Tito crap for all the excuses after a fight. Like, I got a cracked skull, I got a separated L9, LC, L9, and with Nate, after every fight, he's always like, yeah, I ain't even fucking, I ain't spar, I just tried to help Chris Avila, and I don't know. And so I'm like, what's the excuse going to be for this one? It's like, is it going to be like, Masvidal just had too much swag with his shirts and sweaters. It's not fair. From the outset, let me ask you, what state is this in? Sorry, those clips were from Mike Bond's interview. We weren't able to include those, but yeah, I'm curious because I gotta favor Masvidal in this. I know Masvidal kind of had his little freshman 15 post career blow up, but he looks like he's back down in shape. And this is boxing, so there's going to be tighter rounds, which is going to be less time for the Diaz brothers style to kind of drown somebody, right? There's going to be those constant resets. So I don't know. I think Masvidal, it's going to be a big enough challenge for Nate to get by first, let's just say.
Josh Wallace in the chat says they don't get down, or they get down, they don't really talk. Well, I don't know. They used to talk a lot more in the past. Joseph Boza says it wouldn't happen at the Sphere. That's the rumored date for our coaches fight with Alexa and Valentina. Well, we've seen the ladies before step aside and co-main for males in the past. I mean, you might be right, Joseph, but I think it could definitely still happen. In fact, I know Valentina for sure has been a bridesmaid, we'll say, at some of the events where she's defended the title. But all right, I like that, Dan. Great job there with the impersonations. But when the stuff headed to the 305, Danny Segura and his backpack survived the chaotic scene, and he caught up with Game Bread, where they also talked some MMA. Here's that clip.
What does this fight mean in the grand scheme of things? You said you had 3 fights in boxing. You're going to start this one with Nate Diaz. What is the rest of your, boxing career look like? What are you trying to do in this stage of your career?
I'm trying to get some big-ass checks, you know what I'm saying? Break some fucking necks, I wouldn't mind taking on Logan Paul and rearranging his face. He's a hell of a fighter with the boxing from when he comes from being an influencer. He did some good things against Mayweather, but I think I can end that dude, man. I'd like to fight Logan. If I get my hands on Mayweather, Pacquiao down the road, any of these guys, other guys I'd like to fight, and definitely going to come back to the UFC and give a W for my city, for my family, my kids, for everybody who believes in me. I got to go back to UFC.
Danny, I don't know if you're like me, but that Mayweather Pacquiao stuff went in one ear and out the other. I just zeroed in on the fact that he very much wants to return to the UFC. He doesn't like the way things finished there. What did you grasp from it? You were up close. You were the one leading the questioning there.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. If Jorge Masvidal ends up fighting Logan Paul or Mayweather or Pacquiao, sure, there'll be some interest there. There'll be some headlines, but I don't think it changes or it means much for the combat sports landscape. Now, if he were to return to the UFC, I think there's something there. Look, I was there present for Jorge Masvidal's retirement fight in Miami when he fought Gilbert Burns, and he put on a good fight. Yeah, he did lose, but Burns at the time was one of the best 5 fighters in the world, and I still think he's probably up there still. I don't think Masvidal is no longer a top 5 or even a top 10, but probably more likely between 15 and 20, and that's still a pretty damn good range to consider, considering that 170 pounds is a really stacked division. I didn't think he looked bad. His chin was there. It's not like he was leaving on a bad losing streak with knockouts. I do think there's something there for money fights. I've always been a big proponent for the Conor McGregor fight. Look, Nate Diaz is a free agent. If he doesn't want to get tied down again with the UFC, Jorge Masvidal is. So that could be an option. I don't know, man. I just think that Jorge Masvidal has a little bit more left to give in mixed martial arts when it comes down to money fights. I'd love to see him against a Conor McGregor, I don't know, a Bobby Green. There's so many names that pop up that I think would be very interesting for him. So those comments were very interesting. And look, Jorge Masvidal has been training in Las Vegas with Jorge Capetillo, who is the person responsible for bringing Brandon Moreno's boxing to the level that we saw now. And he's been taking this very, very seriously. And towards the end of his MMA career, you would hear rumblings that maybe he wouldn't be training as hard. But once you get a focused Jorge Masvidal, I still think he can be a danger in the UFC's welterweight division. So I'm excited, and I hope to see him again in the UFC. I think there's some big fights there left for him.
Danny, you know how we always talk about all McGregor needs is one big win. He might fight for the title. Well, they used to say that Masvidal, when he left, was the number 2 pay-per-view guy, or maybe even number 1 while McGregor was gone. So I got a question for you. If he were to come back and get one more win, 5 words, 3-piece and a soda, is there maybe come to the front of the line, Mr. Masvidal, against
No,
Leon
I don't think
Edwards?
so, because that 170 division is so stacked, right? Like Ian Gary's killing it, Shafkat's killing it, Bilal Muhammad's
killing it, and he can't get a shot.
I know, but I'm saying like it'd be one thing to skip one guy over, but in this situation, he would be skipping over like 4 or 5 guys that deserve the shot. But I'll say this: if he gets paired up against Shafkat or Bilal Muhammad, we still don't know who he's gonna fight. Man, those are tough fights for Leon Edwards. And not that I don't believe in Leon Edwards, but it'd be tough for anybody to beat those 2 guys. So I think he's probably bound to catch an L at some point with either of those guys. And if he does, coming off a loss, maybe a Masvidal fight does make sense, and that would be interesting. Go do it in London. Go back to the scene where that whole thing happened. There's a storyline there. I think that fight, a lot of people would see it as a wash for Leon Edwards, that he would just run over Masvidal. But I think given the styles that it's, striking, I think it could be entertaining. I think it could be a thing. So I like that idea, but I think it happens in a non-title fight version of it.
All right, I can see Dan Tom standing on the side like one of the little girls when they're doing the double dutch. He's ready to jump in. What you got to say, Dan?
No, that's a sneaky, clever timeline, and I could see that working, although in order for that to work, we actually have to have a welterweight title fight finally put on the books. I know Bilal Muhammad's been waiting for that for some time, right? But I'll say this: give him veteran fights, and not to interject any more BMF talk into it, but this is a BMF worthy matchup, a veteran, a sensible matchup. Give him Matt Brown for his first fight back in the UFC. Matt Brown versus Jorge Masvidal.
I'm in.
And that's
a great idea, Dan.
That could still set him up for taxiing, for Danny's timeline to still fall into play. Like, both could work too. You never know. So it's a great fight to come back to. Throw that on a pay-per-view. Easy.
Oh, yeah.
Protoss Hydraulisk, I think, something like that, says people are still doubting Leon.
Hey, I'm not doubting Leon.
No,
put anybody in there. Put Ian Gary. Put Bilal Muhammad to fight Shafkat and Leon. Like, they're so good that it's just hard to see anybody beat both, get past both those guys. So it's not against Leon. It's just that division is so competitive. But take the Leon Edwards name out there. Put in Ian Gary. Put in whoever you want. Getting past Bilal Muhammad and Shafkat back-to-back is going to be a difficult task for anybody. And I think anyone is probably going to catch an L to either of those guys. So no disrespect to the champion. I believe in him. It's just the way it is.
And
I think
he's gotten
this
better and better and better for sure. Go ahead, Goes.
I think this cluster that we just covered in this topic, it's so important for so many reasons, right? For like the landscape of MMA, if you're one of these fighters that's trying to get away from the UFC and prove that money can be made outside of it, you need Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal to generate money. You need them to sell well. Nate Diaz made a good paycheck with Jake Paul, right? If he can make another one, maybe he doesn't want to go back to the UFC. Maybe he realizes, hey, I can make money here. Jorge Masvidal, probably the same thing. But I think a lot of this has to tie into Conor McGregor winning. If Conor McGregor wins, I don't think we're ever going to talk about Nate Diaz ever again, that fight. That is his get out of jail card, right? If Conor McGregor goes out, gets starched by Michael Chandler, depending on what his contract situation is with the UFC, that's when you pull that Nate Diaz card and you say, I want to fight this guy. We have something to settle, even though it was 2016, I think, last time they fought. Because when it comes to that fight, records don't really matter, right? A Jorge Masvidal, if things don't work out for him here in this boxing fight and he does want to go back to the UFC, again, if Conor McGregor loses, that Danny has always called for that fight. I've always loved that fight. Like George said, maybe possibly 1 and 2 as far as pay-per-view sales. Why not make that fight? That would be a lot of fun. That would be incredible. There's so many different angles that you can do, but I think people really need to pay attention to what could possibly happen with just a few moves here and there on the chessboard, how this can affect our sport and the future of the UFC.
Yeah, great point by Goes. I do think the result of the boxing match between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal could have big ripple effects in the MMA world. Completely different sport, but these guys are just so big and they're tied to so many people that are also big that I feel like whoever wins here it could have a lot of leverage returning back to mixed martial arts.
Dan, what's your early lean on this boxing match between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal?
Yeah, man, I gotta go with Masvidal, not just because of the swag, like Nate was saying earlier on our live cast here, but it's the matchup. You know, I did pick him as far as MMA goes, and in boxing, I actually kind of like it better because you get the upset submission out of the equation from the Diaz situation, and again the round limits. Even if Masvidal wasn't taking this as seriously, and Diaz was taking it perhaps more seriously than we suspect, I still believe that the round frames and timing favors Masvidal.
Okay. All right. A couple comments here from the chat. Boosted Chicken says Masvidal's a bum. No one wants to see him lose. I don't know. That doesn't even sound like they go hand in hand, right?
It kind of sounds like he wants to see him lose, to be honest.
I think he wrote that. Karate Ted Toon says, I'm taking Matt Brown with an emphatic, I think he meant to say emphatic elbow strike. And I think he means Brown versus Masvidal. He also does say, though, it would be an epic fight to put together. Boxing is too corrupt, Forrest Daniel says. I don't know. We don't have time to talk about Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney, but that was a fun fight. Gave a nice little injection to boxing that they needed, I think. But guys, listen, it's time to move on. So 3 weeks are in the books for the PFL's 2024 regular season. What does all that mean? All of their fighters in the 6 weight classes have fought their first round of fights. They each get one more fight, and then according to their point system, they will advance to the playoffs. So it's really just 2 regular season games, or in this case, fights. So if you don't know, if you get a win, it's 3 points or more. If you lose, you get no points. And in addition to what I mean by or more, fighters who finish their fights, they get additional bonuses. So you get 3 points if you finish the fight in round 1, 2 points if you finish the fights in round 2, 1 point if you finish the fight in round 3. So you might want to go to the PFL website. They have the list of the standings there, and then you can make some more sense of this. Listen, guys, I want to know, what's your review to the start of the 2024 season? We're going to start off with Danny Segura.
I like the 2024 season so far. I think with the merger with the Bellator roster, I think we've seen better fights. These last few cards have been pretty good. They just been under promoted, in my opinion. They just haven't made that impact. But the fights themselves, like I was looking at them, and there's some solid finishes there, and there's some quality MMA, which is the most important thing. It doesn't feel like a huge tier below the UFC. In fact, on some weekends, I would actually argue that the PFL has a better card than the UFC. So I've actually enjoyed the product. I think the commentary is great. I like Big John's role that he's in now. I would give it a thumbs up. I'm genuinely interested in how this plays out. And something that I didn't like about the previous seasons is that a lot of these like first bouts, like the season bouts, the playoff bouts would get competitive and there would be big names going against each other. But already early in the season, we're seeing some pretty good fights and some pretty competitive fights, given how the merger of the 2 rosters, just having a better quality of fighters. So I actually think the PFL is doing a good job here. I just would like for them to, and I don't know what else they could do, but just get their product out there a little bit more.
Goes, what's your review so far, and what do you think of the impact of that Bellator roster that has splashed onto some of the PFL series, which is the regular season and the playoffs?
Well, I've always enjoyed PFL, and I think that the season format is what kind of makes it really interesting. Every fight matters, and they add a little bit of a wrinkle every year. But the influx of the Bellator talent is what's making this year stand out a little bit, because let's be honest, how many times are you going to see Chris Wade and Bubba Jenkins and Brendan Loughnane? They needed some fresh faces, some new storylines, and this kind of helped them out a little bit. As far as the influx goes, we had the pay-per-view, it went Bellator's way, but really, if you look at the season, this is kind of where PFL is going to stand out a little bit more because of probably some experience, right? The experience factor. Because if you look at it, a lot of the Bellator fighters took losses in the not all of them, but a lot of them did, man. Storley, Gracie, Matt Burnell, Patricky Pitbull, Piccolotti, a lot of them took losses, and the PFL could maybe even puff their chest a little bit, right? Because they took a beating in that head-to-head. Now it's starting to even out a little bit. But it's really helping to have those fresh faces, those fresh matchups. And like Danny said, even Big John kind of coming over and giving his side of things. I've enjoyed it. I think it's been really cool.
Dan, Tom, you have a grade for PFL so far after 3 weeks? Excuse me.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed the early PFLs, and I've admittedly had trouble, staying with them. But I believe that they're just really fun follows, especially if you can tune in and really like kind of follow the stories. And what I like most about PFL, and this is something that we saw, you mentioned, with the upset against Mads Burnell and some other notable fighters. But you saw this really early on in PFL too, where there's something about it where it's really upset heavy. I know, Bellator had Scott Coker, and shout out to Rich Chu for a matchmaker. So you had, more in line with like traditional strike force matchmaking that we were kind of used to. But with PFL, perhaps it is that tournament, not tournament playoff, league series, if you will. But man, it is so upset heavy that that alone, whether you're a gambler or just a casual fan or anything in between, there's a lot there, I think, for PFL entertainment wise. I know their pacing was a big complaint. It does seem like they've kind of cleaned that up. Although I will say, like, a lot of people complain about the gimmicks, like the smart cage and stuff. I just say go full gimmick, make this thing look like, an 80s movie, like Over the Top, give Daniel James some motor oil to start drinking like he's Grizzly, like really promote these characters, like get it out there more, like Danny said. Maybe not what Danny meant, but, I say go gimmicky, more gimmicky, more gimmicky.
Josh Wallace actually was saying something similar. He says the show is so god dang boring. I literally was losing interest as the night went on. And I think it's something that Goes and I touched on Junkie Radio as well. It's just that pacing. Once the fights do start, I have become a fan because of I expect the unexpected. Oh, Clay Collard has like sent a lot of UFC vets packing, and I know they've been upsets, and I know they've also kind of blown the whole free agency is kind of blown up in the PFL space. But then at the same time, you can't say they're not organic, and what they say and stand behind is not true. And that's the fact that you perform, you advance, there's no politics involved. So that's pretty refreshing, and it's a good push for the UFC. And look, I know a lot of you are just UFC fans. That's where Kayla Harrison came from. So the same one that came over and smashed the former UFC bantamweight champion, that's where she came from. The talent's all over the world, folks. But we do give the UFC their flowers. They're the it show. They're the NFL. All right. From each one of you, give me someone who you think, after seeing them perform and seeing their points, where they stand, who's kind of almost like a lock. And I hope I don't jinx them, but to win this whole season and playoffs. We'll start off with Danny Segura. Who do you like here?
I got to go with Tayla Santos. I've thought Tayla Santos is one of the best fighters in the world. I thought she beat Valentina Shevchenko back when, they fought for the belt. She picked up a first-round submission against Ilia Joanne, and she looked damn good doing it. I do still think she's one of the greatest female fighters at 125 pounds, like I said. And these are the type of free agents that PFL needs to go after, not the free agents that are going on a long losing streak. No, Tayla Santos had her issues with the UFC. She told us on exclusive here on MMA Junkie what those were, so you can check out that article. Is up on the site. But she left not because she wasn't good. She was still a top 5 world-class fighter. She just left because she had differences with the UFC. I do think she's going to win this tournament and these $1 million price. She's great. And she's 30 years old. She's still in her prime. So I'm going to go with Tayla Santos to win the whole thing.
Goes, who do you like to win it all?
Yeah, I think that's a good pick too. Look, George, lock is a strong word, and it's so difficult in this type of format. But one thing I look at is winning that first fight and getting a stoppage early. That does so much for you. It takes off a lot of pressure. I think Brendan Loughnane in the featherweight division, being at the top of that standings, even though he was able to take a tough cat out in Pedro Carvalho, didn't have to see some of the same faces, but this is a guy that's been through this over and over. He basically lives in one gigantic fight camp for like the last 4 years. He's got the system down. Braga, Timur, those are going to be tough fights, but I don't know that he's going to have to face them all. So I'm going to go with him.
Damn, that's some great B-roll right there. Great stoppage by Brendan Loughnane. I know he felt like it was controversial, but man, he got some clean shots in. Thank you for that cold coffee. All right, Dan, Tom, finish up, man. Who do you think can take down the season?
Excellent shouts. I would love to, get behind a dark horse and go opposite of Goes, but I also like his Brendan Locke name pick. Was out there in Bangtan Muay Thai. I got to watch this guy and his dedication up close. Really great pick there. Fortunately, I'm going to have to go head to head with my guy Danny. Although Talia Santos is a great pick, I've just seen so many fighters upset from time and time again, almost going back 20 years now, it feels like, because I just popped in Liz Carmouche's Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen title debut back in Strikeforce against one of my favorite female fighters who doesn't get enough love, Marloes Kunin. And Gorilla's been just muscling girl since back then, and she just continues to get better. She's always an underdog, always discounted. And say what you will, I do agree with Danny. You can make definite scoring arguments for Taila Santos in her last fight, maybe or in her fight with Shevchenko, maybe even her last fight. However, we did see though that fighters that can kind of survive and make it ugly in the grappling realm can maybe produce an upset against Santos. So I wouldn't discount Carmouche, even if you like the Santos side. I'll go ahead and go with Gorilla here for my pick.
All right. Well, we're a little short on time, so I don't have enough time to give you guys a good whitewash like I had planned, both Danny and Dan. You got to keep an eye on Dakota Ditcheva. I think she's going to smash both of you girls. She is tall, lanky, explosive. She can fight with the Muay Thai plum, not just straight on, but when she's up against the fence, she knows how to turn that knee as well. And then, her takedown defense is really, really good. She's got great balance. Like, you grab a single and she'll just hop on one leg. If you put her up against the fence, she knows how to, spread her base and get underhooks. She goes for wrist control. Like, she's really, really cerebral there. She's with a good team at American Top Team, and she's just young and ready to go, man. So I just think it's going to be her, guys. I can't believe all three of us are in the flyweight division. So it'll be funny at the end of the year. Two of us are going to have to eat some crow, or maybe a fourth party will actually make all three of us eat crow. I don't know.
We'll see.
We move on, though. This past weekend had no UFC on Saturday for many. That was kind of a blessing. For others, it kind of sucked. Be that as it may, this weekend we have a UFC card as well as a huge bare knuckle fighting show. It's called KnuckleMania 4. Which one of these are you most drawn to? Like, which one of these is kind of winking at you guys? And is it the best event of the whole weekend? Let's go back to you.
It's the best event of the whole weekend. The KnuckleManias take it to a new level, dude. I'll be honest with you. When this first came out, it was a little too brutal for me. I felt like it just wasn't for me, but they won me over little by little. And I seriously, now every card, I'll watch them from beginning to end because they're so quick. And by the way, they're the opposite of PFL when it comes to pacing. Like, I think as that guy is walking out, the next one's high-fiving him as he's walking in. Like, they make things go seamlessly. David Feldman always has some kind of hook at a KnuckleMania, so there's always a big announcement. And this one is free if you have the app, right? So I don't know, man. Like, if you like combat sports, basically every one of these fights are like BMF fights. Like, they just go to the middle and they go at it. And every now and again, if you have your favorite boxers or something, some of them come over and and Austin Trout has been able to kind of still maintain being a boxer and a bare knuckle fighter. But for the most part, man, it is fireworks, dude. I have a fun time watching these cards.
For sure. And for those that don't know, it's Mike Perry versus Thiago Alves in the main event, and then Big Ben Rothwell against Todd Duffy in the co-main event. And for the UFC, you got Alex Perez and Matheus Nicolau. So just so everyone knows what we're comparing. Dan, Tom, which one are you most drawn to? Who's winking at you? Who's saying, hey, come buy me a drink, fella?
Well, considering the UFC kind of, covering that kind of pays my bills, they're going to win this conversation. And as far as, KnuckleMania, it's interesting because, I definitely am more like where Go started off point. But to be honest, I'm still kind of at the point where, like, the bare knuckle feels like somewhere between, a Tijuana trip to see a donkey show and a model going to Dubai. Man. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a mix of rite of passage and also a mix of, I just low-key need money, and I don't want to, I'm just going to subject myself to some humiliation for a little bit, maybe some bodily harm, and we're just going to move on with our life. So it's kind of in between those realms for me, which says a lot.
A donkey show in Tijuana. I haven't heard that one in a long time, and it's someone that lived in Southern California growing up. Trust me, that was always an option on a Saturday. All right, Danny Segura, what are your thoughts here?
I got to go with KnuckleMania 4. I mean, that main event between Perry and Thiago Alves is super exciting. Mike Perry, man, his career has been insane. What he's been able to do post his UFC run has been ridiculous. Made a bunch of money, been super successful. The most famous he's ever been is now. I really want to see that fight against Thiago Alves. Plus, that's a fight that's been brewing for years. Also, Ben Rothwell versus Todd Duffy. I want to see how that goes down as well. Very interesting card. Obviously, I do like MMA more than bare knuckle boxing, but like just given the names, the matchups, I got to go with KnuckleMania. Honestly, this UFC on ESPN 55 card is not the strongest, and it's another Apex show. And yeah, there's some good fights here and there. Rani Yaya, Victor Henry. I'm excited for that one. Look, even the main event, I think it's pretty decent, but it just doesn't have much weight like the KnuckleMania card does. So I'm gonna go with KnuckleMania on this one.
I have good news for you guys. I've just been messing with you all. In a way, really, they really aren't going to go against each other. So I just wanted to trick you guys' asses. But luckily, guys, at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, that's when the main card starts for the UFC. And KnuckleMania will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So just their prelims and the main card just are going to have a little bit of opposition. You can get them both. So we all kind of win here. But Dan, you brought up something important, man. These Apex shows, they're not the greatest, right? How do you kind of feel about them? I know it's easy to pile on them, but like, is there still some satisfaction, gratification covering it, watching it? Like, you're not watching tomato cans. You're just not watching the deepest talent that the UFC has.
Yeah. Look, these Apex shows are kind of killing me little by little. Like some of these. Look, I'll stay up. When I was covering UFC 300, it was like 3 a.m. I was still working, and I didn't even realize it was that late just because I was so amped up and I was so wrapped up in the fights. But some of these cards, and I know a lot of people, a lot of hardcores are going to have issues with this. And what are you doing covering the sport and this and that? But, dude, when you're working every single Saturday and you have to sit around and watch some of these fights not be very exciting, go to decision, not have much meaning in their division, and it's just like, it's not just one, it's a lot of them. Then you start really wondering, like, man, what time is this show going to be over? So I don't want to disrespect the fighters that are on there, but you guys are OGs. You guys have been around for a while. Years ago, a fight night was featuring Nate Diaz headlining. A fight night was featuring title eliminators. I mean, a fight night sometimes even had championship fights. Nowadays, the fight nights at the Apex are resemble much closer to like what we see in a regional show. And like I said a few minutes ago, discussing about PFL, even before the PFL and Bellator merger, like sometimes the PFL and Bellator had better cards than these Apex cards. So yeah, I mean, it's still MMA. I'm still gonna watch. It's my job. You know, there could be some exciting fights, right? But on paper, these fights are just, this is the lowest quality of UFC we've seen ever, at least in modern era.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing just to say that, to show that we're not discrediting the fighters. It's not even just a broad blanket, oh, they use crap fighters for this and good fighters for that. No, the UFC has an embarrassment of riches. And it's the fact that they will even have good fighters and good matchups, but those good matchups usually won't mean anything. Like, I forget, we'll have like a good lightweight fight, but then it won't necessarily mean anything. We're getting a lot of that. We're getting a lot of senseless rematches, a trend that I've been calling since 2022. And when we actually are getting good weight classes, good matchups, or even matchups that make sense, they often get relegated to the prelims, whether it's a females fight or like we're seeing in the many disrespected men's divisions as well that are lighter weight classes. They are buried in the prelims. So all of a sudden, oh, here you go. Now all of a sudden we're expecting you to know who these people are, because in the meantime, not only is it a lower quality of card, but they are consistently throwing low level heavyweight schlop on the main card, force feeding us like they are this weekend. Like, we're lucky to even have one welterweight fight, and the rest is like a crappy co-heavyweight, a light heavyweight co-main. Like, Dana White still thinks it's early 2000s. It's all about new metal, polar ice gum, and middleweights, and anything above middleweights. It's like, announcements, got more middleweights. Oh, stop. Give us lightweight fights, lighter weight fights that make sense. Pace the cards like Joe Silva used to do it. So I blame more the matchmakers than the fighters when it comes to these Apex cards.
That's the problem, man. Not all cards are created equally with those. And sometimes you have to sit there and you go through that whole thing, and really all you want to watch is like 2 fights. But yeah, I've been telling you guys, like, look, man, the landscape of MMA is very important right now, because if you look at like what we were talking about, BKFC, PFL, look at Luke Rockhold, right? Karate Combat. These guys are cashing in these checks outside of the UFC, and it's given them new life. Like a guy like a Luis Palomino maybe doesn't have much for MMA, but he's making good money over there. Mike Perry's like the face of BKFC. Talia Santos probably said, you know what? Why not try and go make $1 million at PFL? Like, we might start seeing some more of these athletes come over a little bit more younger than we did in the past. I think this is really going to be an interesting year for combat sports.
We're going to wrap up soon, so I need you guys to blast through what I'm going to ask of you. But I do want to include a couple quick comments. Joseph Boza says, keep an eye on Ariane Lipsky and Karine Silva. It's a sleeper fight. All right, well, we'll see what that fight's like. Josh Wallace says, Apex fights make knockouts a little bit more brutal to me. You can hear the sounds and hear them hitting the mat. I love it. So he's kind of giving a contrary point of view. But real quick, guys, 30 seconds or less goes the impact of BKFC for those new fans that might be tuning in this weekend because of what we sold them. What kind of an impact have they had in the combat sports world?
A big one. I think they're giving life to some fighters, giving them nice paychecks outside of mixed martial arts. John Dodson's another name that pops up. He's doing some things over there. So I think it's pretty big, their impact. And I think it's going to get bigger, actually.
Danton, what's the importance of Nicolau versus Perez at 125? The flyweight division isn't too deep, right? And Brandon Moreno's kind of taken some time off. Figueiredo went up a weight class. Pantoja seems to be the man right now. But could this kind of lead to a title shot for one or the other by the end of 2024?
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a contender's bout, and as much as I'm a big fan of flyweight and Alex Perez, who kind of gets a bad rap for his bad luck, this is kind of a very one-sided matchup in the sense of not that it's going to be one-sided and it plays out, but as far as the reward goes, and this is good for Nicolau if he wins. It can boost him up, give flyweight a needed contender.
There you go. And Danny Segura, Perry versus Alves, man. What is your prediction here? This is other than violence. You can't say that word because we know that one.
You gave me the toughest of them all.
Is it crack a beer and just sit back and enjoy?
Yeah, man. I usually don't sit on the fence, but like on this one, I kind of have to because I think Perry is the face of BKFC. He's killing it. He's absolutely built for the sport. But dude, Thiago Alves is a bad dude, and he can still thump. He's got power. He's mean. He's nasty. I would say Thiago Alves is by far the toughest fight that Perry has ever had in BKFC. And he gets hit a lot. He's much bigger than Eddie Alvarez. He's way better and way tougher than Luke Rockhold, way more technical than Julian Lane. This is the fight. I'm super excited for it. I'm just going to, again, pop a beer, watch the fight. No pick for me. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's awesome. Forrest Daniel says, I never miss a UFC card this Saturday. I'll be watching. Joseph Boza says, KnuckleMania 4 has the names that fans may get the app for. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Look, on the way out, if you could kindly hit the like button, we would really, really appreciate it. And even better advice, subscribe, because not only does this content come at you weekly, live, it's every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. If you missed part of it, you can always go back and watch the replay. But there's all the content from the UFC and PFL and One Championship and everything else around combat sports. Like you saw earlier, we were at these press conferences covering it live. We cover most of the major events live, and the MMA Junkie website is the place to be for the best content in mixed martial arts. All right, folks, have a nice day. Go out and be a champion. We'll see you all in 1 week.